Hello and welcome to the Addicts Anonymous podcast. I'm your host, Jim R. Today is episode 172, and we're going to be interviewing Dee Dee. How are you doing, Dee Dee?
I'm okay. Thanks, Jim. How are you
I,
doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to do this. So let's
Thanks.
get started. You said you listened to maybe a few of my podcasts, so I don't know if you noticed. My first question to everybody is tell me about your childhood.
Yes, I do know that. And I thought about that. Uh, my childhood was pretty good, actually, in a lot of ways. My parents were extremely young when they had me. Uh, my mother was 16, so still in high school. And I bring that up only because I learned to have a whole lot of compassion for kids raising kids. That shouldn't happen. They did the best they could, and they made a lot of mistakes, and so did I. And I was in my 20s, and so will my son, and he's in his 40s. So it doesn't really matter what age you are when you have children, you're going to screw things up. I grew up in Michigan in Midwest and was a bit of not only a smart aleck, but a bit of a protege. So I was playing piano when I was three. I was, reading by the time I was three. I was in school. They wanted to skip me a couple of grades. My mother said no. She didn't think that'd be good for me emotionally, and I think she was right. So all went along really well until I probably hit about 12, and there were a couple of things that happened. One was a sexual assault, and the other one was having siblings suddenly in the picture and losing that connection with, in particular, my mother. And I found drugs of all sorts,
What
and it helped.
was it somebody close to you that assaulted you?
No, no, this was more unusual in that it was a stranger assault, at least the first time. There's been many assaults through the years. And the rest of them would be in the date rape kind of categories. But this one was not. This was a stranger.
Yeah, believe it or not, that's actually unusual here. Like you said, I've done a lot of interviews, and most of the times it's somebody that they knew.
Yeah, it's an area of study for me, so I know that. Yeah, which I don't know if that helps or not, but it goes against the paradigm that we learn, and that it's, be careful of strangers. And it's like, no, be careful of the people you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, unfortunately.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So things occurred. I wound up in and out of therapist's office as my parents discovered that I was using drugs
And what age
at
again were you first using?
12.
12? 12,
Hmm.
okay.
Yeah, which in those days was young. Today it's not so much again, but it was then. And
Well, I still think that's incredibly young, even today, by
yeah,
today's standards.
I mean, I would think so too, but I'm just saying if we look at statistics,
Yeah.
it's not that unusual at this point, sort of 12, 13, 14-year old. Uh, and obviously, the younger you start, the harder it is on you, and the more likely you are to use for a longer period of time, which was my trajectory as well. So I wound up having a legal battle with my parents, and I won. So I was legally emancipated when I was 15, I think, and left home. I did manage to go back for a year because I realized I wasn't going to graduate high school. It was a little difficult to try to work to pay for an apartment or a room somewhere and go to school and
Why did
everything.
you leave? Why did you leave home? Why did you get emancipated?
I discovered that my family had decided that they were going to listen to a psychiatrist that had seen me once and decided that, or diagnosed me as a schizophrenic nymphomaniac. Thank you, DSM-3, I think.
Hmm.
And I freaked out. I got angry. I got scared. They had a place they were going to send me to, an institution
So were you
out of
sexually
state.
active at 12? Why did they think you were an infomaniac?
I did have a lot of sex. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sex and love gets very complicated. Uh, my own history is in menstruating early. So my hormones kicked in long before I was emotionally capable of handling that. And that was not a conversation in 1960. What would that be? 1967, 68, somewhere in there, that mothers in general were having with their daughters. So there was no conversation around what that might look like. Not that it's much different today, particularly for girls. And when you get hit with a flood of hormones, it changes your body, and your mind is part of your body. It's not something that you can do anything about. It helps if you know what's going on, then at least you can make sense of it or have someone to talk about it to. I had none of that. And so I acted out a lot. So that was part of it. Part of it was acting out because I was looking for love, because I had lost the connection with my mother in particular, again, who was raising two other kids at that point. But I would be in the neurodiverse category today. So I know the other thing was that I was very attached to my mother, and more attached than probably your typical kid would be. And so that break was really traumatic on me. And so that's what happened.
How was your social life growing up?
I was a loner. I was seen as a teacher's pet and too smart. Nobody really wanted to hang out with me. I was terrible at sports, so that wasn't going to happen. I'd rather be in playing the piano. I was classically trained, and I'd rather be reading, playing the piano, doing things that were socially independent and also far more grown up. I dealt better with adults than I did with kids my own age. I was intimidated by them. I think we all want to belong and be popular to some degree. And I
Yeah.
certainly crave that. And that's part of the reason I started using chemicals as well.
Using what?
Chemicals, substances.
Chemicals.
Yeah, because I wanted to have friends. I decided that I would do anything to have some of that popularity. And in the late 60s, early 70s, that was the thing. I don't know that it's that different in some places today.
So did you graduate high school?
Yes, I did. I graduated on time. I was accepted at the University of Michigan. I got down there for orientation and changed my mind. And I had alumni back to my great grandfather there, so that didn't go over well either. I got a scholarship to go to a private school in Texas, so I went there. And from there, I met my first husband and did not finish college at that point. I like to say I took the scenic route to get to California, where I am now, and a couple of husbands later. And finally got out here. And when I married for the third time was when I went into treatment, into formal treatment. So I went into a hospital-based program that's still here, Oakland, California, that I then went to work at.
Just going back a little bit, I'm just thinking about myself. Were you terrified when you were 15? Because I'm just thinking about my 15-year-old self trying to live on my own and make it. I have, it's still a fight today to everyone, it's rough for
Yeah.
everyone life.
It's a reasonable question, and one I've asked myself, Jim. And to be honest, I can't remember a lot about that time period. I clearly dissociated. That was one of the ways for me to cope with it. And so I certainly acted as if I wasn't, but I had to be on some level. Yeah, I wasn't completely alone. I did have some good friends, and I'm grateful that I had some, both adults and people my own age, that kind of stepped in and helped out. But yeah, I must have been.
What were you doing to support yourself?
What was I doing? I worked for a dentist at one
Okay.
point. We had dentists in my family, so I was familiar with the basics of dental assisting back in those days. So I did some of that. I did the books for somebody. I was a short order cook, and I'm not a great cook, but whatever. I did that for a while. I did some babysitting. I sort of did whatever needed to happen. And then when I turned 18, that was the drinking age in those days. I went to work for the bar that I used to go to, which obviously meant that I had had a fake ID for at least a year or two previous and was
Yeah.
going in. Yeah.
So how was your drug use when you graduated high school? What was it at that point? And what were you using mainly? I guess that would be a good question as well.
Yeah, it started out with, as everyone pretty much does, with just weed, we called it in those days, or pot, and which I wasn't very hip. I just didn't like it. I didn't. Later, I discovered that I'm one of those that it gives panic attacks. So I'm not a good candidate for that, unfortunately, or I would be using that for my pain. I've tried. And alcohol was always there. That was something that was, and those were the days of some really bad alcohol too. I mean, Boone's Farm, apple wine. Oh God, there's just nothing worse to get a hangover or get sick on. So those were the primaries. And then it started with things like we had they were called cross tops. And it was speed, but in a pill form. And it literally had a hash mark on the top, which is how it got its nickname. And you would buy them rolled up in tin foil in a log, is kind of what it looked um, like sweet tarts, and that is what everybody used. It was good for weight loss, and being a female of that generation, we all thought we were fat and needed to lose weight. It also was great for studies. It was great for, I was still a very good student during the day, and then I would go out and party at night. So I needed to have something to be able to do these two worlds and manage, and that helped. We also had a lot of hallucinogenic that we used today called psychedelics. And those I enjoyed a lot. And those were never a problem. I didn't use them a lot. I think I used them for a year or two more than I usually did. It was kind of an experiment to see if you could play the flute and be under the influence of LSD. Didn't work out well, by the way, but it was a lot of fun in that time. But that was sort of the extent of it. A lot of hash oil. What else did we have? We had mescaline in those days, that sort of stuff. And I was the garbage pit. I would take whatever was available. If you wanted to know what something was going to do to somebody, I was always volunteering, saying, I'll take it, you watch me. That'll tell you if it's safe and what it's going to do. So already there was a part of me that had figured out I wasn't very valuable.
Why do you think
I
that
was,
is?
again, attachment is a big thing. And when you detach from people, from your caretakers, in whatever form that is, they could die, it could be other kind of traumatic event that occurs. It could be that, your parents are angry with you and withhold love and affection, and there's a lot of different ways. But this is very typical, particularly in addiction, that we have some sort of lack of attachment. And what that leads to is us feeling empty. And because when you're a kid, you internalize everything because we don't understand, we don't have the comprehension to see our place in the world, if you will, that's around us. So it must be me. I'm the screw up. So if I'm the screw up and I can't find love in any of the right places, to badly quote an old song, then I'm going to turn to substances that at least numb me out and allow me to forget and allow me and my body to just calm down. So it's a form of regulation that also occurs. So in a lot of ways, the irony is that the drugs that we use do an awful lot of positive things. I mean, there's reasons that we all use drugs. Uncovering some of those reasons are really important if you're going to stop or slow down use drugs in a more healthy way. And when I say drugs, I mean everything: alcohol, tobacco, put whatever you want in that category.
I
So
was, I was
having
just
that
watching,
disconnection, yeah.
yeah, I was just watching Dr. Gabor Mate, and
Gabor.
yeah, he sounds very much like with a lot of the stuff you were saying about
Yeah,
attachment issues and things
yeah,
like that. Do
yeah.
you think, because I was also thinking about it during his lecture I was listening to, do you
hmm
think that is a reason that a lot of us addicts have codependency issues? Because that's one thing I've noticed, because we do
yeah,
group meetings and
yeah.
I've just met so many people, and a lot of us have, it was an amazing amount, have codependency issues as well.
Well, I don't know. I'm not a big believer in codependency as a label, uh, but we have relationship issues. Yes, I'll just put it that way in general. And the biggest relationship we have a problem with is ourselves.
Yeah.
That's the first relationship. And if you aren't in relationship in a healthy way with yourself, it's then pretty damn difficult to be in a healthy relationship with anybody else. All right. Because you don't know what you need or what you want. You don't have what what can you give to somebody else if you're depleted, or if you feel like I did, that you're not worthy of love and true affection. Yeah. And I see that all the time in my own clients over the years. Yeah. It's a tough one.
Yeah, like I said, I've just noticed a lot of people have that.
hmm Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So what were you doing in like your early 20s? So you went to college, you graduated,
I
I'm
did.
assuming.
Well, I did not graduate the first time
Yeah, you were saying
from
that.
Texas. Yep. Came out to California. I was working in radio, got offered a job out here, gratefully. So I got out of Dodge, which my ex-husband was very grateful for. Came out here and came to San Francisco in the late 70s. Excuse me. And wound up leaving the job in radio, going back to work in nightclubs, which I was good at and enjoyed because I got to be around people and I got to be able to drink and use other things and not have to worry about it very much. So that took care of that part. Um, I also got pregnant, which I wasn't supposed to be able to do, and wound up having my son, who's now 43. Gosh, nearly 44 now. My God. And highly successful, thank goodness. Has not had the same journey that I've had and many of us have. And I became a single mom for many years. And when I got married for the last time in 88, which was the same year that I went to treatment, so I did everything wrong. I, I had major surgery, got married, and went to treatment. And treatment was first. uh, but that also allowed me the ability to go back to school, which I did. So I went to San Francisco State University, which I passed all the time and really wanted to go to school there. Found that I absolutely loved the human sex department, which doesn't seem like a far cry in some ways from part of my life. It really helped me to come to terms with my sexuality, with my past sexual experiences, kind of put a container and some boundaries around that for me to understand it better. And I also did a degree in psychology. At that point, I was working in treatment and had been for a few years. And so from there, I decided to get a master's. I was encouraged to do that by a couple of mentors that I had that also worked in treatment. We didn't, in those days, have a lot of women who were working in treatment who were also in recovery and had an education. That, and so I was told, go do that. And I did. and I never looked back.
So you enjoy psychology?
I do. I do. Uh, my master's is in health counseling.
Okay.
And so I don't just work in addiction per se, but that is really what I do. Um, and I work as a coach and as a counselor and have done that for 3.5 decades now, nearly. I find it fascinating. Human behavior to me is fascinating. Even my own behavior can be fascinating. So I'll look at some of my behaviors and laugh and say, you're an expert in motivation and in behavior change, and here you are doing the same thing over and over again, and you can't get out of your own rut. Isn't that fascinating? Whereas in the past, it would have been, what's wrong with you? How you can't be an expert and behave that way. You better hide that from anyone, or they won't think that you're capable and competent. And now it's like, no, we're all human. Although my clients and my students are still always surprised when I say, yeah, I'm having panic attacks too. Prices are up and we don't know what's happening in the world and all these things are going on. Yeah, I live in this world. It's just that I recognize it better and I have some tools that maybe they don't that I could tap into. Not that I always do, because again, I'm human.
So going back again, when you were going back to school and you were
Mhm,
finishing up everything,
mhm.
what was your drug and alcohol use like?
When I went back to school, my drug use had settled into alcohol and cocaine. And it was cocaine that took me to my knees. Uh, Again, gratefully, I give my ex a lot of credit for not only hanging in with me, but also paying for my treatment, because otherwise I certainly couldn't have done that. And I do appreciate that. And that became my life, recovery in the traditional sense. I was a 12-step baby. My sponsor, who is also on my master's committee, his story is in the big book of AA. His sponsor was Bill W. So all of that experience led me to some amazing places, emotionally and psychologically, if you will, and just stories that I got to hear, which I talked a little bit about in my book that I wrote. Um, I found that I could manage my drug use to a certain degree. I had gotten it down to about once every other week, which was really good for me, I thought. My ex didn't think so because, as we know, it's not how much you use, even how often you use. It's what happens when you do. And I was not very capable, as a lot of people aren't, when they're under the influence of a lot of a stimulant in particular. But then you add the alcohol on top of that. So it became an issue in my family, my nuclear family, if you will. So my ex and my son. And finally, it was my son who, just off the cuff, sitting in the back seat of the car, said, "Hey, Mom, are you still using cocaine?" And he was 8. And that got my attention. It wasn't what took me to treatment, but it started me. It's like having a balloon that you start poke little holes in.
You said he was 8
Yeah.
and he knew what cocaine was at the time.
Well, apparently so. Of course, I never used it in front of him. We thought we were hiding it, as we all think we're doing. And our kids know. Well, they know a lot more than we think they do. And that was one of the pieces that really got my attention. He doesn't even remember saying that, of course. Oh, he was 8, but I sure do. And there were, some other lesser big events, but still there were events, there were thoughts of, I always said that I would stop using when I had the right job, when I had the right education, when I had the right husband, when, whatever it was. And I heard a voice that said, okay, so now what's your excuse? You've got the home, you've got the car, you've got the education, you've got the husband. It's now what? And a couple of other things that kind of coalesced. Apparently, I called a friend that had gone to treatment. I don't remember making the phone call, but she does. And she said, I asked her for help. And so she took care of it. I was a piano teacher in those days, just kind of like finding out your local librarian is shooting heroin, you know? It just
Yeah.
doesn't seem to fit somehow. Only mine was cocaine. So he took care of calling all of my students and letting them know that I needed to be hospitalized for a while. And, so I went away for the month. And again, I was really privileged in that I also didn't have to go right back to work when I came out of treatment. I could really just take care of myself for a bit. I mean, I did have to go back to work or I would have lost my business completely, but I could go back in slowly. And I worked part-time anyway. And that's all I did. So I would see a few piano students. I would maybe go to the grocery store. That was all I could handle. And slowly started getting healthier. I was introduced in treatment to better nutrition, exercise. That was part of it. And I wound up going back when I worked for the same program. I was their exercise coordinator and developed curriculum for, in those days, we called it chemical dependency and nutrition and exercise and relapse prevention. I did my master's in relapse prevention. So looking at how we do treatment in this country, which we don't do a very good job of, and looking at nutrition and exercise as supports, and I would definitely add sleep. That would be another part. A buddy of mine did his PhD on that. So having, these other we think of as ancillary supports, and I want to say no, those are primary supports because it is what supports your brain function. And if your brain doesn't have the nutrition and the hormones through exercise and other things that it needs to function properly, it can't run well. It's kind of like a car. If you put in shitty gas, it's not going to run if you have a high performance car. So, that was really interesting to me. And I had not thought about that before, of those things being important. Gratefully, I had a sponsor, who did think all those things were important and would sit in meetings and get into a lot of trouble, but because he had the cred, he could get away with it and, tell people they shouldn't be smoking and remind them that good nutrition was really important, particularly for relapse prevention, lowering your stress. So I was very fortunate to be around these extremely intelligent, very well connected in 12-step folks. When I made the decision to leave 12-step, in fact, and talk to them about it, he and his wife were my longtime sponsors. She had a PhD in human sexuality and was a sex therapist, and he was a medical doctor. He was the chair of UCSF's OB/GYN department up here. And he was the one who Bill Wilson was his sponsor. And I'll never forget, he said, that's fine, baby. It'll always be there. If you ever need it, come on back. But I didn't have any of the scare tactics, any of the, oh my God, you're going to drink or use again if you leave. And he reminded me that Bill Wilson wanted people to stop going to meetings. He did not ever see that as a lifetime commitment. Lifetime commitment to your health, absolutely, but not to meetings, unless you wanted to. If you're comfortable there, that's great. And it's okay to leave as well, because the whole point of recovery was to recover your life. And I like that. So I think I have done a great job of recovering my life.
This is a random question, only
Yeah,
because a lot of people have issues with stimulants. Do you have ADHD?
I do.
Okay.
But I've
Yeah.
been diagnosed with just about everything under the planet. So
Yeah. That was another, me too. I have it as well.
yeah,
That was another thing Gabor Mate mentions. That's why I
yeah,
was asking is a lot of
yeah,
people that lean towards the stimulants have, ADHD or
yeah,
ADD issues.
yeah, yeah. Mine is mild. I've never needed to take any medication for it. And frankly, I like to say that I make ADHD work for me. So, because I have chronic pain and some autoimmune conditions that really zap my energy a lot of times, I've learned when I do have that energy to really turn into that and use it. My little mini manic episodes, if you will, and go, yes, okay, let's get some work done.
Yeah.
What are the things I need to do? And again, it's being mindful of it, right? It's being aware of it, knowing what it is, so I don't need to freak out, and knowing it's also going to leave me at some point. So, and that helps me because then I'm mindful of the crash that may come. So I'm not going to let myself get too amped up because I don't want to crash too far either, because my body is already crashing from the pain. So, how do you deal with it?
Well, for me personally,
Yeah,
at the time, I also when I was using, I did use a lot of Adderall. I snorted
yeah,
a ton of Adderall. I like
okay,
cocaine. The only
yeah,
reason I ever stopped cocaine is it started really hurting my nose, and the come
yeah,
down was much worse. But there were days I stayed up for, or times I should say, that I stayed up for 3 days,
yeah.
just snorting Adderall and playing my guitar and playing piano and trying to write and read
There
songs.
you go.
Yeah, but I've learned. So right now, I also take Strattera to
Uh-huh.
help. I used to take something called guanfacine,
Okay.
but then I switched back to Strattera because it helps me a little better.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I do use it when I have somewhat of a manic episode.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, I'm aware of it and I use
Mm-hmm.
it resourcefully. I because
Mm-hmm.
if you take a look, I'll show you later. I write a ton
Yeah.
of articles for the group. I wrote a book that's going to be out soon. So a lot of
Terrific.
that, I
Mhm.
know that I was manic during that time,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
I focused it on good things.
yeah,
Like growing this group and everything was a big part of it. And
yeah.
I mean, how I deal with it now is just breathing exercises. I try to
Mhm.
do as much meditating as possible. Believe it or not, that helps a lot with my focus.
Yeah.
Um, and just really staying on like when someone mentions something like in
Mhm.
conversation right now, if I want to ask a question, I say it to myself like 3 times in my head because I have to focus.
Uh-huh.
Otherwise, I'll zone out and lose track of what I was talking about.
Yeah, I do that too. And I'll do that in session on occasion. We'll go off on a tangent.
Yeah,
Part of the reason I take notes because it helps me to get back to it and go, okay, now it's time to get back to it.
exactly.
But, it's okay. Yeah. I think isn't it's really lovely to feel like you know what's going on though, huh?
Yes.
To have a name for it, to know it's okay. It doesn't have to run my life, at least for some of us. I appreciate some people's ADHD or whatever they're coping with is much more severe. There are cases, but most of us can learn some tricks or tools that can be really helpful. Yeah. Oh, I see Kitty now. I saw ears. There
She's
she is.
That's Buttercup.
She,
She's joining us for
oh,
the interview. You have any
and
questions, Buttercup?
I know. And Izzy just came in. So he
Is he?
must know that there's a cat.
Oh, he sensed it.
Exactly. You're going to come up and Zoom bomb for a minute? Let's see. Let's get you here. Okay. Come on, handsome boy. We'll do this one for a moment.
There she
There
is.
he is. Oh, what a face this morning.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. Now you're tangled up in my.
there you go.
Hey, thank you, Is. It's okay. So, again, for me, I was lucky that I wasn't on medication. And I know I did see a lot of folks and still do on occasion, young folks, seems like it's mostly young men that are diagnosed with ADHD as teenagers and wind up on medication. And then unfortunately, the doctors will stop the medication. And I've always thought that's not necessarily a good idea because then I see too many of those kids and turn to street drugs.
Yeah.
And it's like, please, especially right now, don't do that because it's really deadly out there. And it said just stay on whatever medication might be helpful. Change the dose, make sure they're doing other things, exercising, whatever it is that could be helpful, meditation, breathing,
Yeah.
all those things. But, medication is fine. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people I've heard some people say, well, I don't think it's sober. Well, I have a host of mental health issues. You know what I mean?
Most of us do.
And if I was
Yeah,
without my medication, I'm very different.
right.
And it's no
Well,
good.
and there's this, I think I usually have one right behind me. I don't right now. There's this amazing little pamphlet that's called the AA Member and Medications.
Okay.
And AA itself says, hey, it's up to you and your doctor. And nobody in a meeting should be telling you anything about a medical condition.
Yeah.
And I love that. And a
Absolutely.
lot of
That's
people don't
perfect.
know about that pamphlet.
Exactly. I know I've never heard of that.
Yeah, they
Never heard of
updated it
that.
recently too to include Narcan and buprenorphine and some other things in there.
Okay,
Uh,
cool.
yeah, you can find it on their website.
Yeah, I have to definitely check that out.
Yeah, it's in a PDF now, which is great.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
So how you doing nowadays? How do you keep them sober?
Oh, that's a good question because I don't think much about it. I realize I'm coming up on, it'll be 35 years in January.
Wow, that's amazing.
And, it's been so fucking long ago. It's like I am like, I say I'm recovered, but I made a deal with myself. And the deal that I made was I drank and used substances for 20 years from about age 12 to about, I think I was nearly 32 when I got into treatment. And so my deal was I have to not use for 20 years. And then I could make a logical decision of if I wanted to go back because substances are always going to be there. And when I hit that 20-year mark, I said, I think I'll do a few more. And so, but I also felt like I was done. I realized it not an issue for me. And God knows I have issues. I've got all kinds of other issues. So I'm grateful I don't have to worry about that one anymore. Yeah. I also, as you've heard, I work in the field. I still sponsor people. I still do a lot of volunteer work. I work in a different way these days. I'm a harm reductionist. And my book was on combining 12-step and harm reduction, called Coming to Harm Reduction, Kicking and Screaming. So, because that's how I came to it. We have become in our world today more accepting and understanding of what harm reduction actually is and the fact that it's always included abstinence, because for some people, that's what works is abstinence. And if that's complete abstinence, I don't actually know what that means. How could anyone be completely absent? Does that include sugar? Does that include caffeine?
Mm.
How far do we want to take this? And if it can include, if I can call myself abstinent and I can have coffee every morning and sugar every evening, then why can't I take heart medication or something for ADHD that's actually prescribed? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. So I do a lot of advocacy around harm reduction and around how 12-step has always been harm reduction in its origins. I think it's unfortunate that there are too many people out there today that want to determine other people's recoveries.
Yeah.
I was taught you don't do that. Somebody is sober when they say they're sober, and somebody is a member of a 12-step group and they say they're a member. And that's it. Besides, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. It was Dr. Bob that wanted, no, it was Bill, sorry, that wanted to put in a sincere desire. And it
Yes,
was
I've
Dr.
read that.
Bob, right, that said, no, 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 no. We're not going to have a police here.
Yeah.
Right. So I love that. I love that history.
Yeah, I'm a big person on the history of AA. I've read a
Yeah.
lot about it. I
Good for
think Bill
you.
W. I've said it before, he's a rock star because before AA, there was no self-help group for addicts. Period.
Mm-hmm.
Dot the end. It didn't exist.
That's right.
So he
That's right.
started it. Him and Dr. Bob started it.
That's right. And, Bill went on to use LSD.
Yep.
Uh,
Because he was
and
trying to
that's,
recreate the spiritual experience he had, and he heard that people
yep,
went through spiritual experiences while taking LSD.
right. He also suffered with really bad depression,
Yeah, I heard he
which
was bipolar,
he
possibly.
may have been. That's absolutely correct. I mean, we can't know for sure, but it might make sense because he wrote the 12 by 12 in that decade of depression, which explains a lot if you've read the 12 by 12. It's, pretty dark, and think, okay, we kind of get that. And he was searching for another way, to have some additional help, because AA was never seen as treatment, first of all, right? It's a self-help group, a mutual, we're here to be in fellowship with one another, to support one another, but not treatment. And he also often said, because he also studied under Carl Jung, and he was good friends with Carl Jung,
Mm-hmm.
and said, go to a therapist or go to a doctor, seek out other people to help support you, whatever you need, because this probably isn't going to be enough. This might be enough for your drinking piece, but remember, drinking is only a symptom of a condition, which is another thing he said, which is absolutely correct. Now we understand that trauma plays a big role in it and some other mental health concerns. And we're learning more and more about that, which I think is fascinating. Kind of proves him right.
Yeah. So getting towards the end here, did you
Mm-hmm.
have anything else you wanted to add in?
I thought it's a good question. What else would I add in? I think I would only add in that my wish for everybody is that they could have a truly non-judgmental, compassionate place where they could discuss their relationship to substances without any fear that someone's going to judge them, that someone's going to tell them they have to be abstinent for the rest of their life, that someone's going to tell them what to do, or threaten them. And instead, just have real relationships, because it's in that relationship that we have with each other. That's where the healing comes in, and that's where it grows. But you can't heal and have judgment in the same room.
No, I think you're definitely right on that one. Because they're going to be more hesitant to accept help if they feel like they're being judged.
That's right. That's right.
And that's
I
when you
was
lose,
really
that's when
lucky.
you lose people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I've lost, I can't tell you how many people in 35 years. Yeah. And all of it, every single one of them was for a reason that didn't need to happen. It was because somebody was being judgmental, either in the rooms or out of the rooms. It was because somebody told them not to take their psychiatric medication. The young man that I dedicated my book to, Mike, died because of that reason. And very sadly, the old timer that told him he was not clean because he was taking this medication, when he found out that Mike had died from suicide, said, well, at least he died clean.
Oh my God.
Now you know why I left 12 step.
That is an
So
absolute
that's it.
shame.
That's enough for me.
Yeah, no, that would have ended it for me too. That's an absolute shame.
And I don't mean to lump every 12 step group or every member into the same category. I mean, I had been in the rooms for a good 12, 13, 14 years. So it's not like it was in the beginning of my recovery either. But that was when I decided that I would find support in other places. And I did. And I continue to.
All right. I think that's a great place to wrap it up. I really thank you for
Okay.
coming on the podcast today. This has been an awesome interview, I think. How do you
Thanks so
feel?
much, Jim. I feel good. And Izzy wants some treats down here now.
All right. Well, sit tight for you and Izzy.
I
Sit tight
will.
for me.
Thank you
For
so much,
everybody,
Jim.
no problem. It was an absolute pleasure. So for everybody watching and listening, if you like what you heard and saw, go below and give us a like. Also subscribe to see when we upload new videos. You can check us out on Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Tumblr. We're pretty much on all social media platforms. You can also check out our website, which is www.addicts-anonymous.com. There you will find plenty of resources as well as free literature. So again, I hope you enjoyed today, and until next time.